Liberty is basically doing what's right. Freedom is having choices, Thomas Jefferson said. But you must stand for liberty if people are going to have freedom. And that liberty means these are inalienable rights that cannot be infringed upon. And liberty, like muscles, if they're not exercised, you lose them.
This whole event, Think, Pray, Vote, is I think, so critical for us as Christians, because so many of us, we understand that our faith is the most essential thing in the world, literally.
Yeah.
And yet, faith has been deemed non-essential in some circles. Churches have been closed down in some states more than other states. And we've heard about this separation of church and state. And so we sort of feel like we're not welcome in politics, or at least our faith isn't. And you speak to all of those things in such a powerful way. And that's why I'm excited that you're here.
Well, thanks. Being a pastor politician, you've always been told that you're not supposed to talk about religion and politics. I'm the guy you don't invite to the dinner party, so yeah.
I don't think I ever have invited you to the dinner party. I've been taking that advice. And some people know you in certain circles as the mayor of your city. Other people in other circles know you as the pastor of their church.
And some know me as both.
And some know you as both. That's right. So let's talk about the pastor side. This year, 2020, has been utterly unique in so many ways. But how has it affected church life for you?
So in California, where our church resides, Ventura County specifically, Governor Newsom has declared the church non-essential. The latest orders from the governor is we're not permitted to meet indoors. We have to meet outside. And as a sitting city councilman, and I was the mayor of the city in 2019.
Right, I remember during all the wildfires and even the mass shooting at Borderline Grill.
Yeah, we lost 12 young people in that shooting. 2 of them were from our congregation. I officiated their funerals. I love our city. I love the citizens of the city of Thousand Oaks. I love our county, the 856,000 constituents within the county. I don't ever want to bring harm. But in the same regard, on April 4th of this year, that was our Holy Week. And one of the sacraments in the Protestant faith is communion. And we practice communion the first Sunday of the month. Well, the governor outlawed it. He said the church was non-essential. We couldn't even follow CDC standards, and I couldn't live with that. The church is essential, and Christ is essential. So I violated the governor's order, and we hosted communion on Palm Sunday, April 4th, and our sanctuary holds about 400 people, and we had 10 chairs. We followed complete CDC guidelines. It took over 3 hours for all of our congregants to take communion. And we were deemed a great threat to the community, but when the press came out, they rightfully commented that it was unbelievably clean and that we did a better job than Costco or Trader Joe's or any other facility. And April 3rd, the night before the communion service, it had gotten out in the press, and we didn't do a press release. And I realized at that moment that my colleagues, who I adore on the council, who were facing enormous pressure from the state and the county, would have to censure me because I'm violating the governor's order, and they would have to continue to censure me as long as I was in violation of that. So I resigned my seat, my hard-earned seat that I loved. And we didn't just willy-nilly wide open the church, no social distancing, no masks. We participated and yielded to the governor's order because at one point he said you could have 100 people or 25% of your capacity, whichever was less. Because at the early stages, we didn't know the severity of the virus. And we all were wanting to honor every aspect of it. But when we found out that the virus affects those 65 and older with comorbidities, and then when the governor embraced the rioters, we realized this had nothing to do with the health of the city. It had to do, from our vantage point, politically. And when churches are shut, Kirk, there's a 5 times greater chance of suicide. And people say, why can't you do church over the internet? Well, it's like watching a fireplace on the internet. You can hear it and see it, but you can't feel the warmth. And how do you counsel somebody who's crying over the internet? How do you mend a marriage with a couple that's struggling when they come up weeping to the front of the church over the internet? And the 2 reporting agencies, mandated reporters for abuse, are schools and churches, and those have both been closed. And so you have those who are being abused quarantined with their abuser. And they can't go to a hospital. And loved ones are dying without their loved ones around them. And people say, you know, the second greatest commandment, love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
How can you love your neighbor when you're exposing them to a virus? Well, we're not. We're following very clear outlines. We haven't had a single case. But I would say to those who would say that to us, we do love our neighbor. We love the 65% of the restaurants, those who own them, that have lost their life savings in those restaurants in our county will never reopen. We love those whose children can't go to school, whose children have special needs, whose classes have been shut. We, again, love those who are being abused, who are being forced to be quarantined with their abuser. We love those who couldn't be with their loved ones over a virus that in our county has a 1/100th of 1% death rate. And tragically, 150 people, plus or minus, in our county have died, and they've attributed it to COVID. But on the Freedom of Information Act, when we went before the judge, we found out that only 2 of the little over 150 victims and 856,000 population of our county, only 2 died from COVID. The rest died with. So we had someone who...
That's an interesting difference, dying with COVID and dying from COVID. What's the difference?
So there was a young man who died of a fentanyl overdose. And when he died, he was tested positive for COVID, so they counted as a COVID death. Only 2 people died from COVID, no other comorbidities. They just strictly died from the virus itself. One was a 94-year-old male, and the other was a female in her late 70s.
Wow, those are stunning numbers.
Yep.
But here's the fly in the ointment. For a lot of people, they're thinking, wait a minute, I think I just heard you say maybe 3 or 4 times we violated that order.
We did.
We stood in opposition to the governor's edict. Isn't there some verse in Romans 13 that talks about submitting to the governing authorities?
Yes, and I love that verse. And I honor that verse. It says in Romans 13 to honor those in positions of authority. God's appointed them. They're ministers for our good, not for evil. And then it goes on to say that they're ministers of justice to execute wrath on those who do evil. They possess the sword for that purpose. And I'm in full agreement with honoring the authorities. But what folks don't understand, and I do as an elected official, is that when I was elected, I had to swear to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That we reside in a constitutional republic. And the first 3 words of the preamble of the Constitution define who the authority is in Romans 13.
And it's the president, right?
No, it's we the people. We the people, in order to form a more perfect union. Representatives, elected officials, governed by consent of the authority, we the people. And when I swear to defend that Constitution, the Constitution doesn't give us rights. It's 7 articles of the Constitution designed to defend or to protect the citizenry from elected officials who would step outside of the confines of the 7 articles. It's to hold them accountable. The Constitution doesn't give us rights. It protects elected officials from infringing on our inalienable rights given by God. And the Declaration says that when an elected official violates that Constitution, it is our right and our duty to push back. I'm not in violation of the authority. The authorities are in violation of the true authority, which is we the people. The governor has violated the First Amendment. I love my city. I don't want anyone to die. I don't want anyone to be sick. I lost 2 of our congregants in that shooting. But we've had no less than 10 doctors and 2 psychologists. We've gone through the entirety of this virus. We've looked at it up, down, left, right, in, out. We've seen it all.
Yep.
We've looked at the data, not the narrative, but the data. The empirical data. We've looked at masks. We've looked at social distancing. We've looked at the psychological ramifications. We've looked at how a virus operates. We've looked at the data in the county. And there's no justification for what the governor is doing to the church. And they haven't even addressed the psychological and spiritual ramifications of what's going to transpire when this whole thing is over. And the devastation they've done to our state financially, emotionally, spiritually, physically, it's awful. I'm defending the Constitution.
This speaks to the importance of Christians being involved in the public square.
Yeah.
Can you imagine if we had Christians who saw it as their missionary field is to move into positions of leadership on their school board, as the mayor, their city council, and governor, and even president? How great that would be. How many problems would be solved, how righteousness could flourish. One of the things that I think draws so many people to your church, and I've seen hundreds of people, even thousands of people coming in to your church, that in your church can't even hold all these people. They're waiting out in the parking lot till the next service so that they can get in.
We broadcast an FM station, yeah.
Yeah, is that you're showing people the importance of faith acting itself out in the public square, not just being private inside the church. But there's also non-Christians, unbelievers, showing up at your church. They're fascinated. What is it that you think that they see?
That's a great question. And I really, that was one that moved my heart. So good government only happens with good people. And you're advocating, or at least you're pointing the question towards Christians engaging in the public square. And I'll cover that momentarily, but I want to address the last part of the question.
Yeah.
So when we opened the church and we were in violation of that restraining order, people came from everywhere that would never darken the doors of a church. They showed up at our church. You had skaters and surfers. And the reason why they were there, and I told them this, I said, your streams of liberty have dried up because their beaches have been shut and their skate parks have been filled with sand by a tyrannical rule. And they had taken away their liberty. And their stream of liberty dried up. So they went upstream. And we know 2 Corinthians 3 says that where the Spirit of the Lord is, there's liberty. And I said, you've come to the source, Jesus. And the Apostle Paul wrote in Galatians, stand fast therefore in the liberty for which Christ has set you free. You know where he wrote that? In prison.
In prison.
Yeah. Liberty is basically doing what's right. Freedom is having choices, Thomas Jefferson said. But you must stand for liberty if people are going to have freedom. And that liberty means these are inalienable rights that cannot be infringed upon. And liberty, like muscles, if they're not exercised, you lose them. In the stairwell of the law school at Harvard, there's a plaque from a 1917 commencement that says the law is the wise restraints that make men free.
The law is the wise restraints that make men free.
Yeah, so how can restraints make you free? You apply restraints towards evil in order to pursue excellence. We're created in the imago Dei, in the image of God. We are prone to sin, which is enslavement. And God sets us free by the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus from the law of sin and death. And as we apply restraints towards evil, we achieve and obtain this imago Dei, this image of God, as we excel in the capacity God intended us. Sin comes naturally to us. And if we afford humanity access to everything that enslaves them, we'll never be able to achieve this excellence. And so we must participate in the public square. And this is the critical component. You know, when Jesus goes up to Caesarea Philippi with his disciples, a long way from Galilee, it's a long hike. It's the headwaters of the Jordan. When he gets there, he says to his disciples, who do men say that I am? They say, some say you're John the Baptist. He says, yes, but who do you say that I am? And Peter says, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. He says, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven. Upon this rock, I will build my, and everyone says church. Well, King James translated it church, but Tyndale and the Geneva Bible translated it properly. It's a secular term. Jesus co-opted a secular term. In the Koine Greek, it's called ecclesia. He didn't say synagogue, he didn't say temple. He used a secular term called ecclesia. Tyndale translated assembly, and so did the Geneva Bible. We translate it church. But the true meaning of the word in Koine Greek is public square, assembly. You will create these laws, as it says in Galatians 3, the law is a school teacher, guardian, to point us to Christ until faith comes, and it keeps us safe. We must contend in the public square for the safety of a pluralistic society to point them to Christ with the laws of nature and nature's God until faith comes. That's life. Keep them alive.
Rob, I'm so grateful for you. Thank you for taking this time to talk with us and help us to think through the critical issues so that we know how to pray so that we can walk in there on November 3rd and vote.